My name is Kate Mason. We are here at Toronto Hub, which is on the outskirts of Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, for a presentation by Julianne Romanello on Smart City or Surveillance City. Newcastle is a forerunner for smart cities in Australia. Newcastle was also selected by the World Economic Forum as one of 36 cities to pioneer a new global policy roadmap for smart cities. Many of us are only starting to become aware of implications of what smart cities, the implications on our privacy, our rights and our safety. And though it's been hidden in plain sight, there has been very little community consultation and no discussion on the implications the council and the public-private partnerships by the council or the public-private partnerships in what will occur with bringing in the technologies. There's been no exploration on how we're going to be affected as people living within these communities. So we are delighted to have today with us Dr. Julianne Romanello. Julianne has completed her doctorate in political philosophy, whereupon she embarked on a career in academia, teaching at a number of universities. Julianne's research currently focuses on the fourth industrial revolution, social impact finance and technofascism. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to have an hour of your presentation and then time for question and answers. And thank you so much for putting the focus on Newcastle for us.
Oh, you're welcome. It's really a pleasure to do this, to use one of the phrases of the resetters. We really are all in this together. So what happens in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm from, which is a mid-sized city about the size of Newcastle in the heartland of the US, is almost exactly similar to what's happening in Newcastle, Australia, and in cities all over. So what I found is that there are patterns and playbooks and toolkits that are used over and over again. We're not dealing with very creative people. So if I can show you the patterns that I have seen in my hometown and in other places in the state, then I can teach you how to identify the New World Order programs that we're dealing with. And this is actually a sort of fun test for me to see how those patterns translate. So, I have done a sort of crash course in Newcastle, Australia in the past week or so. And, we'll see if I have a good idea about what's really going on. I think I do, but, you all can help fill in any gaps that I've left or correct anything in the question and answer. And that will help me to, improve this type of presentation. So it really is a gift to me that you all are allowing me to give this talk and look at your city. And it looks like a beautiful place to be. And I hope that the resetters don't ruin it. So let me make sure that I have my screen share on, because I'll use some slides just to help flesh things out. So like I said, first of all, let me say that Kate has done some wonderful work in pulling up the documents that support the Smart City Initiative in Newcastle. It's a wonderful document. It's textbook, reset, and I think I'm really looking forward to the last part of the talk when we go through what is a terrifying plan for your city when I look at it. But before getting into that, I'd like to just go over, a general idea of what's happening. Probably because you all are at this meeting, you have a good idea of what's happening. But there is not so much focus that I've heard in people who do this kind of work on the corporate and economic transformation that's going on. So that's one area that I have focused on. It's the transition to inclusive capitalism, and that is the new international economy. And, I have in this slide, it's related to the fourth industrial revolution. It's related to Agenda 21, stakeholder capitalism, which was a theory about corporate change that was written by Klaus Schwab. And I have, some graphics of the UN SDG goals down there. So it's all related. The Build Back Better, it's going on here in the States, it's going on in Europe, it's going on in all of the Five Eyes nations. And those are, that's a catch-all term for Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, former British colonies. So we're really tracking on the same path. Okay, I put this slide in just because I think it's good to look at the historical documents and have evidence of, some of the claims that we make. And this is a document from 1974. It's the United Nations Resolution on a Program of Action on the Establishment of a New International Economic Order. And, as I was looking into what was going on in Australia, it looks like your country has been much more welcoming of the United Nations and the aspirations that it had in terms of those, goals for making a more equitable economy. It seems like you guys got on board with it sooner than we have here, although it's entrenched here in every state, every institution that we have. But we've been in denial about it. So I don't know how the sentiment is in Australia, if there is a sort of different attitude about this new international economic order. That'll be interesting to talk about. But in any event, here's the document. It says that we're going to have a new international economic order, and we're basically going to transfer the resources of the developed world to the developing world. And when you read it, it sounds like this is really a program to help people who are, still at a sort of, at a developing economy. That's the word that they use. But mainly it's about sending money to the Southern Hemisphere nations, with the exception, of course, of Australia. And so then I have a document here where this is from 2012, where they're reiterating this program of moving to a new international economic order. And that is, we can just call it the New World Order. That's my favorite. So what smart cities are about is they are the mechanism by which you enforce this new world economic order. Okay. And corporations are too. But what we'll sort of focus on in this first part is just how the Great Reset, which is, coming out of the World Economic Forum, it is accelerating the transition to the new international economy. So a lot of people look at health and, the mandates that went on. They look at, other policy issues, but I've sort of landed in this economic zone. And I'm viewing the Great Reset as an economic reset that is, it is the product of, and it is accelerating these sort of four trends that I have listed on the slide. So, if we want to understand what's going on, we really do have to look at what's going on with the fourth industrial revolution. Now, that is a program, it's a high technology program that is designed really to push us into a convergence of the physical, biological, and digital worlds, so that we become better than human, because we can incorporate all of the technologies of computing into our own thinking, into our own experiences and feeling and being and everything else. I was really surprised when I first started digging into this, and it really wasn't very long ago that I started digging into it. It was just before COVID. I was surprised at how advanced the technology is. the technology that large corporations have, that our governments have. Um, it really blew me away with the sort of precision technologies that they have, the nanotechnologies that we can't even see because they have been designed to be micro sensors, nano sensors. Um, for our purposes, we need to understand that this fourth industrial revolution is disrupting, that's a buzzword that they use, disrupting all sectors of the economy. So what we hear about in the news, we're probably 10 to 50 years behind what's actually possible. So, I look at a lot of headlines in mainstream media, and there are reports that the fourth industrial revolution is going to lead in the US to something like 88. Let me see. I wanted to say that I'm going to get my number wrong, but it's millions of jobs are going to be lost because of automation, the incorporation of robots into everyday life, and the use of algorithms and technology. So for our purposes, that we need to understand that the fourth industrial revolution, it is about creating massive job losses. And this is one thing that I try to talk about with the normies. Let me see if I have a slide that I could show you. Well, I'm not going to mess with it because I have problems with technology, but we're projected to have millions and millions of economically irrelevant people in the US. I know the same thing is happening in Australia, and it looks like Newcastle. I was reading just about the steel industry. It looks like much the same thing is going on there. That is what we see in the news about the job losses is probably an underestimate because the technology is so far advanced. So, with COVID and all of these different mandates and precautions, safety precautions that forced us to use meetings like Zoom, or to buy products online, or to use contactless payments, or to order to order food in rather than going and dining at a restaurant. All of those silly requirements that were pushed on the public, they were not for health and safety. They were actually to disrupt supply chains and accelerate the transition to a robot and algorithm based economy. I like to say that most normal human beings don't want to interact with a robot. We don't like it. It is my kids who are ages 4 to 11. They don't want to interact with a robot. They understand that it's unnatural. No one wants, robots caring for the elderly or for children. But that is what COVID brought us. Okay. I think that our resetters had to have a cover, such as a public health emergency, in order to roll out some of these technologies that most people would not have accepted otherwise. Okay. So I think that is a crucial piece of the puzzle to understand. What the resetters want to do is replace all of us with a robot or an algorithm. Now, why do they want to do that? Well, it's really about managing risk. So, on my last slide, it had a little picture of a book, The Workplace in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And there's a wonderful passage in there that said, robots don't argue, robots don't get sick, robots don't do all of these things that are messy human behaviors that cost the corporations or the government money. Okay. So they want to get rid of us and manage the risk to their bottom line by using algorithms and software and robots. Okay, but no one wants that. No regular people want it. So you have to have a cover of COVID. Okay, so when we think about the impact that that kind of disruption will have, they call it disruption, that's their word. We're looking at the creation of an economically irrelevant class that has to be reskilled. Okay. And so I think when we start looking at the universities and University of Newcastle, especially, and how it is setting up pathways with your primary and secondary education to create new jobs and life ready and career ready people, then we have to understand that process in terms of managing human beings who otherwise would be without work and without any kind of occupation. Okay, so you have to manage them and you have to reskill them and retrain them. And it's important to understand that a lot of the talk about workforce development and workforce readiness is not actually about, preparing people to engage in gainful employment or to work productively in a trade or anything like that. It's actually about sort of keeping them in the process of lifelong learning. That's another buzzword, so that you'll be too busy to throw off a tyrannical government. Okay. And they're also going to make money off of you by, sort of mining your data as you go through these training programs and you go through reskilling and upskilling ad infinitum. So if we think about the purchasing power and the investing power of people who have been out of work for 2 years with COVID and then going on into the future, we have no economic value really to them. I mean, I like to think, I like to tell people that where we spend our money doesn't exactly matter here in the States because the corporations are so powerful. They actually don't want our money anymore. But if they did, then we wouldn't have any after all of this. So their task, the resetter's task, is to extract value from us. And how are they going to do that? It's by pumping you and especially your children through an upskilling or reskilling pipeline to the workforce. And it's going to be a managed economy workforce where only certain sectors of industry are promoted by the city, by the corporations that are there, and by the governments and billionaires that are funding this thing. Okay. So you have an economically irrelevant class. How do you justify keeping them alive? And that's really how brutal these people are. You're going to do it by pumping them through this educational pathway and mining their data as much as you can. Okay. Another part of the last couple of years, where are we at? We're at a situation in which zero trust is the new certification that everyone wants. What that means is that as we move to a connected world, a life that is mediated digitally, we're always on our devices. We're talking to people, through apps and things like that. Let's see. And we're, excuse me. And we're seeing this convergence of man and machine, really. How do we keep things secure? Because as we move to the cyber world, attacks on critical infrastructure or, just the systems that people use every day, those attacks can come from anywhere because we're a globally connected world. Okay, so just to pick up on our second point of what we're going through right now. First is we're dealing with the disruption and automation. Second is that we're moving to a world that wants to have a zero trust framework when it applies to verifying your credentials to access anything. Okay. We don't want to trust your word or anyone else's word about who you are. And if you claim to be able to access a place, we really want to uh, forego the trust that we might have, just sort of as a human sentiment. And we want to say, no, you have to prove it to me. Prove who you are. All of our all of our purchases are being made online. All of our, healthcare is being done through telemedicine. In that situation, which is prone to cybersecurity threats and risks, we're seeing the narrative developed that you must be able to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt, so beyond trust, who you are, and that you have legitimate access to whatever it is that you're trying to engage in. So, it's sort of like a military checkpoint, right? Um, if you want to go into some place, you have to show your credentials, show your papers, right? Well, that is the mentality that we're moving toward, but it's all going to be digital credentials. And here in Oklahoma, where I am, we have apps for digital driver's licenses. I know in Australia you have a company Trust Grid that is basically an e-wallet that will hold all of your credentials, whether they are medical records, employment, documents or certifications that are relevant to employment. Say you completed a training or have a degree in some area, or they might have to do with, let's see, your enrollment in a gym or your enrollment in childcare or something like this. In this digitally connected fourth industrial revolution world, we want those to be portable and to have security certificates that are of the highest caliber. Okay, so we're moving to digital identity on blockchain. Blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, and I think you guys are really at the forefront of implementing it. It's the technology that Bitcoin was based on, and it is basically, you know, it's basically a series of nodes that record information in a distributed way. And in order to change any information on one of those nodes, you have to have all partners agree to it. So it's supposed to be unhackable and permanent. It's a permanent ledger of your life. Well, that technology made the resetters so excited because they thought, here we can verify every single human transaction that there is. It's all going to be recorded on this blockchain, which is, just think of it as a ledger of your life. And, with the capacity for quantum computing and data storage that we have now, these resetters have decided that you can have these digital copies of every human being out there. And it's called your digital twin. You can have a digital twin of a city. You can have a digital twin of anything. And what that digital twin is it is a virtual record of everything that you've ever done, right? And you think, well, okay, my driver's license, my appointment with a chiropractor, oh, well, who cares? They can see that. Well, that won't be the only thing that's on it if you live in a smart city, because smart cities are equipped with so many levels of surveillance and connected the Internet of Things, which is just the sensors on every single, parking place, every street light, every appliance that you have, all of those different items that, you know, in normal life would just be an item. Now they're going to be connected to the internet, and they're going to be registering whether or not, say, you walked by, or you ran the dishwasher, or did you cross the street at this point? Okay. All of that smart city surveillance is going to be collecting data about everyone and everything, and it will be written onto that digital ledger. And so those records are very valuable to people who are engaged in things like predictive profiling. Okay. And, you know, it is, I think just talking about it is very scary to the average person. So we have a narrative of this zero trust framework, and we say your privacy is going to be protected. You know, we're going to implement all of these different cybersecurity checks, but those very same checks are actually part of this transition into a situation in which we're going to be, you know, basically social credit scored. Okay. So the next two things, and I'll sort of zoom through these. We're seeing a transition. The last 2 years is really about a transition from representative government to corporate governance. Okay. Now it's very pronounced here in the States, and it looked to me like the same thing is going on there. I mean, I know you're that in Newcastle, you're seeing a lot of public-private partnerships, and the uh, outsourcing of, you know, governmental activities to task forces that are not elected by the people. Here, it's everything. In the city where I am, we have economic development councils, we have councils of government, we have, uh, did I say task forces, councils, think tanks, focus groups, all of those experts who have been appointed by civic leaders and, you know, and also elected officials. Those groups are taking over the duties that were normally under the purview of an elected and accountable government. Okay, now we could probably argue about how accountable the government is, but at least on paper, it's set up to be responsive to the people who vote and reside in the places that are under the authority of that government. Now we're seeing the move, and this has been a long time coming, but we're seeing the move toward these stakeholder councils and things like that. Another really important way that COVID, and I like to call it the corona apocalypse. Another way that that plays in is that at least here in the States, we saw, and there's all sorts of propaganda that supports this point. We saw the government look totally incapable, and this is sort of for the normies out there who believe the mainstream narrative. Okay. We saw the government look like it was incapable of taking care of things like creating a stinger, you know what I'm talking about. Whereas the private sector was very efficient in coming up with this stinger in record time. So there, you'll see all sorts of propaganda if you start to look that is about trust, public trust. And so we're seeing here a barrage of propaganda that says trust in public institutions is failing. Trust in, oh, there was another one, it's not government, but anyway, you'll see that there is discussion about the failings of government and how the private sector was able to come up with solutions that the public sector was unable to formulate. So we have the Edelman's Trust Barometer. It comes out of the UK, and the resetters really pay attention to this. And I have a slide, I think, that where I show it. It says businesses and employers are the only institutions that people trust nowadays. And so it's reinforcing this idea of moving toward corporate governance rather than representative government. And of course, the end trajectory of all of this is the total and complete privatization of government. So we'll all live in a sort of company town. And at least here, we saw that the corporations and businesses and employers and schools were the main enforcers of mandates. Okay, it wasn't the government, because there wasn't a law that said you had to have a mask on or that you had to take the stinger, that you had private businesses acting as enforcers upon citizens. So that is a long-term goal of the resetters, is to destroy popularly elected and accountable governments. Another important thing, or a prong of that, I should say, is that the destruction, the controlled demolition of the economy, it had the effect of starving governments and public bodies of the revenues that they need to pay for entitlement programs. So your Medicare or Social Security or any kinds of benefits, social service benefits that the government is obliged by law to provide, it now does not have the revenue to cover the costs of those programs. And there are lots of sneaky things going on with, say, tax incentive packages that are given to corporations right now in the interest of spurring the innovation economy and attracting young talent. Those kinds of innovations, and then also some different negotiations with indigenous people and here Native Americans regarding their tribal sovereignty. All of those, all of those strategies are designed to starve governments of revenue so that they will have to rely on private sector funding, so corporate funding, to make up for the gaps. Okay, and lastly is the economy and the impact. We're moving toward this impact economy of value. Now, the impact economy is probably the most, let me see what, it's probably the trickiest to understand, it seems, when I have done these talks before. We're moving toward this new international economic order, which really is not about gaining in wealth or creating profits for businesses. And it tracks the trajectory that we're on, tracks very well with the move from shareholder capitalism, which is a theory about what corporations ought to pursue. And in shareholder capitalism, they pursue profits for the stockholders in the companies. Okay. We're moving toward Klaus's stakeholder capitalism. And that is a new theory about why corporations exist and what purpose they serve in society. And Klaus theorizes that they exist in order to produce value for the society or the community. And it sounds very nice, right? Oh yeah, businesses are going to stop being so greedy and pursuing profits, and they're actually going to care about workers and the people in their cities that are affected by things like pollution or long working hours or plant closures or whatever the case may be. It sounds good, but instead we're moving to this new international economy, which is trading in behavioral outcomes. So we're not talking about you work for money anymore. We're actually talking about you work for social credit. And if you think about the sustainability agenda, one of the tools that it uses is a cap and trade mechanism of issuing carbon credits to different industries and saying, okay, well, as a nation, we're going to have 100 credits of carbon that we allow our industry or our industries as a total to emit. we're going to divide them out, 25 go here, 10 go here, and so on. And the different companies could trade those credits, but it's a fixed amount that exists. That's how the new international economy works. But instead of just carbon credits, although that's still a huge part of it, it's going to be based on behavior and values. Okay. So that's where social credit scoring comes in. And obviously, China is a prime example of it, but the Western countries we're being set up for it as well. And that's where all of the surveillance comes in. Because you'll remember that the first point is that we are seeing massive job losses, and so those people no longer have the ability to invest. They've become economically irrelevant. How are they going to participate in an economy, and how are they going to make it grow? Because no one wants to talk about a recession. All your politicians, all of your business leaders, all of your civil society leaders are going to say, well, we want to pursue economic growth, right? The way you understand that and the way I would understand that is, you have a sort of flourishing economy that depends on individual business enterprise, and people are doing what they have found to be productive and give a profit to them, and some sort of product or service that's valuable to the community, and you trade. Well, in the new impact economy, you don't have enough people who are economically able to purchase the goods and services that that are going to be supplied by the economy. So you have to find a different way to create economic growth, because they're not going to let go of the language of economic growth. But because we've lost our purchasing power, because we're unemployed, because we're all broke, since our criminal governments have engaged in, printing all sorts of fake money, we have to find a new way to create the illusion of economic growth. And that is by trading in these values or social credit or reputation capital. Okay. The impact economy is a moral and ideological program that's based on the UN SDGs. And those sustainable development goals, when you read them, they all sound very nice. They all sound nice. We want to, they say eradicate poverty. I personally think that is an impossible situation. And so I would be sort of cautious just because I saw the word eradicate. But let's just say that it said we want to, diminish the pervasiveness of poverty. Well, that's a goal that most of us could all get behind, right? So those SDGs sound very good. We want to make sure that people have access to clean water and healthy food and a clean environment. It all sounds so good. It sounds good because the words and language have been developed over the course of decades with intensive focus group testing of what words and phrases are sufficiently ambiguous and also give a sort of positive sense that's going to put people at ease when they read them. And a lot of it is military technology that's gone into developing those goals. So they do sound nice, and I'll try to unpack some of them as we get later on into Q&A or whatever. Those goals are actually a moral and ideological program that is designed to constrain free discussion, free movement, free everything. Okay. And it's really a program of social management. So that's really what we're moving toward. This major surveillance state that's going to track your behavior and it's going to track your attitudes, and it's going to nudge you through technology to, um, to adopt certain behaviors that maybe you wouldn't have done if you were left to make a free choice over it. Okay. Oh, whoops. Okay, so inclusive capitalism, this is the American version. I'm sure that there's one for the US, the purple slide. That's the World Council for Inclusive Capitalism. And, that what are they promoting? Equitable outcomes. That means they want to level off all resources that people have, whether those resources are skills and credentials, or whether it is property or anything else. Fairness across generations, that just means that they want to track and trace one, generation to the next. And it goes on. You'll see we have the framework for inclusive capitalism. For us, it's a new compact among businesses, government, and American workers, and that is really supposed to replace the rights that are outlined in the Bill of Rights. Okay, so inclusive capitalism is really about impact investing. And this is, let's see what, it is a new financial model, a new system of financing that goes along with that new international economic order, in which you have investors that are looking to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. What that means is that investors, large corporate investors, and say philanthropists and private equity firms, hedge funds, they are all they have figured out a way to incentivize compliance with the UN SDGs. And that is in order to manage the risks to their New World Order system. Okay. In other words, it's to ensure that human beings don't have the understanding, wherewithal, or resources to oppose the 4IR or the massive globalization that is occurring, and also the loss of our rights and freedoms. Okay, so the impact, if I want to pull the fancy clothing off of it and say what it really is, that's what it is. It's a program of control that is designed to look like businesses are promoting the social good. Okay, but how do they describe it? They're these investments in positive social outcomes that are aligned with the UN SDGs. It is a model of investing that assumes that mitigating risks, and those are things like environmental risk, the risk of climate change, and the potential of natural disasters, or mitigating inequality in society, which will lessen the chance that we'll have civil unrest. All of those kinds of risks are tied, they think, to long-term costs. So if you mitigate those risks, that is, you prevent them from actually being realized, then you, on their argument, you will have long-term savings that will benefit the entire economy. Okay, so they're justifying a preventative liability management program on the potential of future cost offset. Okay, and so basically it's a pattern of control. We're going to control every potential risk so that we can make sure that we're going to have the prospects for long-term economic growth sometime down the road. And the more I've gotten into it, the more I think that that is just a sham argument. I don't even think that they believe it, but that's what's being sold to all the corporations. And even though maybe some of you in the room, you're not exactly concerned with, how financial investing is evolving, let me tell you that it touches all of us, because these impact investors, and these are ultra wealthy financiers, okay, developed in the UK, the US, and Australia. It's the Anglo-Saxon world that came up with this mechanism of impact investing. Um, they have figured out a way to make sure that the pensioners' funds are committed to sustainable investing as impact investing. So in California, which is its economy is it's the size of the rest of the United States. Okay, their teacher retirement funds were targeted by these big bankers who have convinced the managers and directors and executives of those funds only to invest in uh, in companies and sectors and industries and any kind of business whatsoever if that business can prove its commitment to the UN SDGs. Okay, so you're seeing it with these large investing funds, and businesses and large corporations are all trying to prove that they are aligned with the UN SDGs. And what it is a sort of top-down management of the distribution of financial capital. So if you walk into a bank, I mean, was it Australia? I just saw recently that a certain bank chain was going to stop giving loans for vehicles unless they were electric vehicles. Is that Australia? I don't know. Anyway, that kind of trend where you will be denied, say, access to a loan if the thing that you want to purchase is not sufficiently sustainable, that trend is going to be echoed and magnified all throughout society. So, for example, Microsoft has in its company policies right now, it has a standard, or it's issued a policy that says that anyone with whom it would do business, a private contractor, government, any other business, they must agree to respect Microsoft's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so it's basically saying Microsoft, which is, I don't know what number or ranking it is in terms of the largest multinational corporations. But if you want to do business with them, even down at the very local level, like you service copy machines or something, you will not be able to have a contract and do that business that your own private business might need for its bottom line if you do not agree to adopt this moral program of the SDGs. Okay, so this trickles down to everyone. You're seeing it in school systems, in hospitals, in corporations, and it's all coming from the very top. And if you look at who is in the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, it's the Ford Foundation, it's the Rockefeller Foundation. It is, here it's our chambers of commerce, it's our labor unions. Everybody is in on it. And it can be a little frightening, but I don't know, it sort of gives you courage as well when you know how bad it is, I think. So anyway, that's what we're transitioning to is this new model where we trade in behavioral outcomes. Corporations are, they're no longer going to be trying to make as many cars because people won't have the money to buy them, because it will be socially taboo to drive them. And all of this, was really accelerated by the pandemic and this public health emergency that was declared really for the purpose of reconfiguring supply chains. Okay. Now, when it comes to government, this is a slide that I used when I was talking to the Republican women of the state of Oklahoma. So I say, how is it possible to reinvent the constitutional system without an election, a convention, or a revolution? Well, you create a problem, you craft a narrative, you control the response, and you introduce a solution. So at the bottom, you see automation could eliminate 73 million jobs. In the middle, this is a scene from that trust barometer that I mentioned. Business is now only business now only institution seen as both competent and ethical. Oh, so we like business and the corporations and the Economic Development Council so much better than government, right? And then it takes us where to a new social contract. And I don't know, with the way things are going in the US, I'm betting on the people of Australia to raise a better response than we are right now. We're slow, slow, slow. So also just to reiterate, decreased revenues, increased demand for public services, and struggles to innovate. This makes corporate governance replace representative government. Okay, smart cities, and this is, oh goodness, smart cities are for impact tracking. So we saw impact finances, the way that the economy is moving. Smart cities, Newcastle Smart City plays into this. Now, this is a report from the G8 Social Impact Investment Task Force. This is the Italian report, and I found it to be really helpful. You'll see in the box, it says social entrepreneurship. Those are your impact investors, digital technologies, that's your smart city infrastructure, and co-creation, the concept of smart communities. And you guys are slated to be one. It says digital technologies are going to be in the service of local social needs. So of course, that controlled economic demolition that's been wrecked on the whole world has left people with huge social needs. Kate did a wonderful video about the real cost, like the mental health toll that the past 2 years have taken on people. It is in every sector. Businesses are starving. Children have been sort of set back in their educational programs, and they're having to sort of relearn things or just deal with being set behind because they couldn't actually attend the classroom. All of that demolition of our established institutions and systems, it was created to cause a greater social needs among the public, greater demand for public services, because you have people who are hurt, who are suffering, who have been, I say, victims of war crimes from our governments and the corporations and bankers that are behind it. Okay, so we have many more social needs now, and the Smart City program and the Impact Investing program wants to meet those needs, track them, trace them, and eventually monetize them. That is to make them a source of profit. Okay. So, these digital technologies can help to determine if someone's made the right decision, if they have followed some prescription for behavior that was given to them by a school counselor or a court or something like that. Okay, so what a smart city is for is not just making sure that traffic runs smoothly. It's actually for measuring and managing these behavioral outcomes and making sure that all resources are tracked and traced so that they can be equitably distributed. And that is supposed to, they argue, lessen the risk of things that might undermine economic growth. Okay, so you can see by combining the social and technological approaches, strategic systems can emerge that will use ICT tools as communications technologies as innovative support for the provision and management of services through public-private partnerships that can ensure grassroots participation and develop scalable solutions that can address real local needs. So you guys, I'm sure, are seeing lots of propaganda about mental health, about the need for affordable housing, about the need for financial literacy curriculum in your schools. You name it. There are tons of these different social programs that are rolling out, and we're being told that we need them. They're creating a sort of demand for those, and then government doesn't have the money to fund them, right? So we're going to have the private sector step in and say, we will fund it, or we will administer that program, and we will make sure that it's working by tracking and tracing you. Okay, and it's not just tracking and tracing in a way that you're aware of. That is like, you sign onto the internet, you know that you're being tracked and traced. This is just walking down the city, the sidewalk in a smart city that is equipped with myriad sensors and cameras. It's going to be watching you, tracking and tracing you without your knowing it. Okay. Now, this is sort of where we get to, how did this happen anyway? Because it sounds so big and bad that I think people, at least some of the people that I've spoken with, don't believe it's happening. And so I'm always trying to find a way to persuade them that it is. And I thought, well, if I can show you sort of how they have, that they, the resetters, have gotten so far with this, maybe you'll be more convinced. So one of their main tools and strategies is this collective impact strategy. And, this is from the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It's a magazine that everyone who's interested in impact finance reads. All the bankers read it. All the hedge fund managers read it. All of your guys at the Chamber of Commerce, they all read it. The yuppies, they read it. And it talks about the 5 conditions of collective success, or in other words, how do you implement a totalitarian agenda without looking like you're doing it? And that is that you come up with a common agenda, a common vision, and your smart city plan talks about it, and the strategy for Newcastle University talks about it. We have a shared vision, a common vision. I'm trying to find it here. Let's see. We have a common commitment to and it'll go on and on. But you have this common agenda, and it's going to be all of your nonprofits, all of your businesses, and government agencies and schools and things like that. They're all going to be talking the same way and pursuing the same goals, which really are the SDGs. The second feature of collective impact is that you have shared measurement systems. And in a report that I have, it shows you impact investing cannot work unless you have measurement systems, smart city measurement systems. The shared measurement systems they have been here in Oklahoma, where I am, for about 30 years. The resetters in our state have been working to create these longitudinal data sets about students, and they want to share that student data so that would come under our Department of Education. They want to share that with the Department of Health and Human Services. They want to share that with the Department of Transportation. And you see all of these different data sharing agreements that are being signed and put into place even in law. And it's part of this collective impact strategy, so that everyone is getting a piece of the data, which is so valuable in the new impact economy. They want data, data, data. Why? Predictive risk profiling, and then intervention and management. Okay. The third of these collective impact conditions is mutually reinforcing activities. So you have a United Way that is doing some kind of a drive to help, kids in need. Well, they're going to sort of work with other partners. So if you look on any website for, your corporations, your NGOs, nonprofits, or faith-based organizations or government, everyone's got multiple partners and they're all sort of pursuing these goals in common together. And it sounds nice to us. Oh yeah, they're cooperating, but really they're doing it to share data, to get control over people and control their thinking and promote this New World Order agenda. Fourth, continuous communication. That is through meetings, and, checking in on apps and doing things in real time and just making sure that there's a constant need to be engaged and checking your phone and doing these things. So it really creates a sort of feeling of like belonging and an attachment there. And then you have to have a backbone support organization. And those are usually like community service councils or the United Way or very large groups, NGOs, or in your case, universities that offer support just for the administration of this agenda that is common to all. So you have large organizations that facilitate this collective impact strategy, and that's the reason why they exist. It's just to make sure that everyone is doing all of those conditions of collective success. And, here we have, for example, the United Way will pair with businesses and they'll come up with incentive programs, and they'll say, oh, if you donate $2 of your paycheck, you get to wear jeans on this day. And so it sort of creates the social pressure to join in. Oh, it's only $2, and everyone's going to know that if you're wearing slacks instead of jeans, that you didn't fork up the $2 for the United Way. And it starts like that. And then pretty soon you're hearing this rhetoric about millennials don't want to work places because they will only work in places that have a large community engagement strategy. And you see businesses are transformed that way. And, leadership institutes play a huge role in this. And it's sort of like crony capitalism and putting the right people in these positions to do the dirty work. Okay. The next one, and then we'll sort of skip, I'll try to wrap this up in about 5 minutes, and then we can get a question and answer and talk about the Smart City Plan. But the second strategy that has made this program work is the anchor institution strategy. And it was developed by think tanks. Let's see, the Brookings Institution, that's located here in the States, Center for Community Wealth Building, Policy Link, US Federal Reserve. I have Griffith University, which is an Australian university. You guys know that. And like Pro Bono Australia. These different think tanks and organizations are promoting what's called the anchor institution strategy. And that is that you take an institution like a hospital or a university that most people have some trust in. Okay, trust management is very crucial to this agenda. And you really involve or incorporate or co-opt that institution into being a driving force of this agenda. So You make sure that you hire teachers or doctors or administrators that have been sort of groomed or trained in the language of the common vision that's being pursued. And that is your New World Order or Newcastle 2030 agenda. And you get them in leadership positions in those institutions. And the public trusts the institution, not knowing that it has been slowly stacked with people who are on board with the New World Order agenda. So when I look at universities here, this for public universities, we have a board of state regents. Well, I can pull up those public documents from the board of regents that talk about hiring strategies. And it says we have to make sure that we hire this kind of person who's going to promote workforce development, economic development, and so on. And you transform the institution, and then that institution, it trains people who will go out into the community to promote that agenda. And they call themselves change agents and thought leaders. And, that program of social change is linked to economic development, and it's described in terms of innovation and modernization and taking us into the 21st century and becoming a global leader in this, that, or the other. And around the physical location of those anchor institutions, you can do a lot of revitalization efforts, and usually there are tax credits that go along with it. So you see many ways to transform both the economic sectors and the employment sectors that are attached to those areas. You see that, because these anchors are usually high-tech research institutions, you can implement that zero trust framework where you have secured access to places. Like if you look at college campuses here, they're almost like prisons. You have to buzz in and you have to prove that you have the right to be there. There's no assumption that you can enjoy those places. And then, the like politics that govern those areas around anchor institutions are usually made by task forces rather than representative government. And then they are engaged in this impact economy. So they align resources and strategies to promote the outcomes. And here, and that's from Pro Bono Australia. I'll give Kate these slides so you can look at them. Australian universities, what they're doing is they're administering these social impact programs where they go out and test different behavioral interventions. Now, a lot of those are programs that benefit poor people, who need a lot of public services. But the goal of the reset is to make us all poor, and everyone's going to need public services. And that demand for those creates the need for investment that is tied to impact tracking. So, you can see Australian universities, as anchors in place, they're engaged in place-based impact investment. That is social credit scoring. Okay, this is your Newcastle University. You can see the priorities: better, healthier living, next generation resources, growing industries, connected communities. These are all the buzzwords, and you see it, they even call themselves an anchor institution. These are all the buzzwords of the New World Order. They're going to create a stronger, more inclusive society, to build local capacity, connectedness, sense of belonging. Okay, this is the orange box here is from the Newcastle Smart City Plan, and it talks about the smart economy. And you can see that it, at another place in your Smart City Plan, it specifically mentions this Honeysuckle City Campus development and the innovation hub there. And I think it's under a program called I2N, like Innovation to Network, something like that. They come up with all these names. In Oklahoma, USA, we have I9E. So once you start to see the patterns, you're like, oh gosh, they don't come up with anything new. But you can see that these partnerships, this honeysuckle campus development, it is established to promote social entrepreneurship. What that means is just the sort of development of social impact programs, that is, programs that are going to make you incorporate the SDGs into your life, or going to use taxpayer money to fund programs that pursue those goals. And you can see it's a public-private partnership. We're moving toward a city digital precinct. That's your sort of zero trust framework. And just to finish up, I'll say here are just looking at a couple of documents from Newcastle. This is like a list of what I would say are reset initiatives. I'll just read off some of the names so that you can see that I did some homework here, and maybe you'll recognize them. And you can trace the people who are on the boards of these initiatives or who are in charge of them, and they've gone through Leadership Newcastle, or they were in a position in a high up NGO or something like that. Okay, so you have the Renew Newcastle Cultural Incubator. They want to control arts and public art and activities. Star 4000, which is a partnership with the University of Newcastle and Slingshot, and I think that's an app. Newcastle City Council Smart City Initiative. I2N, that's your network of innovation hubs. Innovation is, when you see that word, know that it's promoting 4IR technologies, so automation and disruption. You have the STEM Ships Apprenticeship Program, and I think that's training your young kids to be workforce ready and go into the industries that Newcastle is promoting. And those are regional tourism, aerospace, engineering. Let's see, what else do you guys have? They were very similar to mine. Actually, I think you guys look very much like Detroit, Michigan, USA, which, the Ford Motor Company was hurt by many levels of regulation. And now they're making electric cars, and Detroit was really destroyed economically, I think, for the purpose of building back better, which started in about 2013. Your international expert panel on, as part of your smart city plan, had Cogility, Hitachi, David Locke Associates, a consulting firm out of the UK, SMEC, ITP, Urban Tide. You have a stakeholder engagement program with Cred Consulting and John O'Callaghan Consulting. You have RIM Plan, Hunter Infrastructure Investment Fund. That's your impact investing. Hunter Digit, it's DIGIT, which I think is your smart city digital precinct project, and probably your digital wallets. And there's the Australian Smart Communities Program, and it just goes on. So anyway, I think that's what you guys are dealing with. And I'm sorry that you have the terrible misfortune of being chosen as a WEF smart city. Chattanooga, Tennessee has been chosen for that privilege as well. And I've got a friend who has a CBS radio show, and he's trying to fight it. He's doing a lot to educate the people there, but it's hard and slow going, and the odds seem stacked against us. But in any event, I think more people are becoming aware of this. I think because it deals with the management of trust and reputation capital, you cannot underestimate the power of public opinion to sway this agenda. So if we want to roll it back, we actually have a huge force, and that is public opinion and discussion and just getting people to understand here's what's going on, here are the words that they use. And if you just know those words, and we have it in the sort of public psyche that those words and phrases and types of programs are to be avoided, then really I think you could have an amazing pushback. But you do have to sort of break through language that sounds nice and decode it for people. But anyway, thank you for bearing with me through this long technical talk, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Julianne. That was a wonderful talk and presentation, and really helpful for us to understand, as you said, the way past the buzzwords. The buzzwords are all words that we would want. We all live in a greener, less polluted, more caring, more truly compassionate society. And yet what we're seeing is we're becoming increasingly controlled by corporates, and even BlackRock put out a letter to CEOs stating how corporations are now more trusted than the government, and it's increasingly being controlled what we're being fed. So we do really need help with understanding past the buzzwords to understand the true implications, and there is such little discussion on that, which is outstanding considering that we live in a democratic, reportedly democratic society and countries. So thank you. So I'll open it up to question and answers, and I'll see if people's voices carry, otherwise I'll repeat it to you through this microphone.
Okay. Yeah, it was a little hard to hear just the first part, but just to speak to that issue of digital titles to your home and liens. Yes, we're seeing that move here too. So just in the past 6 months, Oklahoma, where I am, and we're actually very far ahead in the digital transformation. Which we're a red state. So people think that we're sort of safe, and we're not at all. It's actually, I think, progressing faster in the red states because they want to pursue economic development, and because people are not looking at the dangers of the digital transformation of the economy. So anyway, we're seeing the move to holding liens and titles and things like that only as a digital credential, which means that, you can, as a private individual, you cannot prove that you have that title. You're dependent on the technology, which is what one goal of this is to make you dependent on the technology, so that you must use a smartphone. You must use something that tracks and traces you. If you want to establish ownership of anything. So we're seeing that here. And, we have, I have some new friends from Canada who they actually fled Canada just in December because of how terrible things were getting there. And so I was talking to him about the differences in, private property here and there. And that's not an area that I feel really confident in speaking about, but it does seem that the US has stronger protections for private property versus, I think, Australia and Canada, where, I think the Commonwealth can, they can do those kinds of innovations more quickly and probably with less pushback from the people. So Yes, that's absolutely a part of it. And it is very dangerous, I think, to not have a paper copy because for those reasons, you can't prove that you own something without using your track and trace phone or establishing a digital wallet for yourself. So it just makes it very hard to get off the grid. Um, and then the question about owning nothing and being happy, I, you know, I think what we're going to see as a result of the controlled economic demolition and the push to address climate change um, is you're going to see a lot of heavier taxation to fund the government in order to save businesses, save small businesses, or provide for those who were injured as a result of the stinger, or to help provide for academic remediation. Those are the narratives that we're going to be given for much higher taxes. And I think that is going to be one way that uh, you're going to be stripped of what you do own, whether it's your property. I mean, here we have seen property taxes, and this is across the board in every state in the union. Property taxes are going way up. So, and that's really hurting the lower middle class, you can imagine, who are also probably facing job losses as well. So I think you're going to see taxes that are going to make it more difficult for you to maintain the property that you have. They're also going to control the use of that property through different regulations and zoning requirements and these small scale administrative rules that tell you how you can use a thing. So um, what's a good example? I mean, as more and more businesses and governments sign on to the ESG agenda, which is about, saving the environment, it does not really, but it's about the carbon tracking and tracing. I think we're going to see the policies that are to promote environmental sustainability lead to a whole slew of of difficult regulations like that make it hard for us to use those things, and then also just absurd regulations that waste your time. I didn't talk about it here, but one of the one of the things that you own that they don't want you to own is your productivity. And this entire agenda really works by forcing you to jump through a bunch of hoops and get frustrated complying with regulations and proving who you are and filling out this form and doing that and the other. So it'll be harder to keep on top of all of those regulations. If you're trying to make sure that you're square in one area of your life, other things are going to be more chaotic. But I think watch for those regulations, watch for eminent domain as you see revitalization efforts and the whole transformation of cities. Here we're seeing major eminent domain abuses. And there was a Supreme Court ruling that said that this sort of gave cities license to use eminent domain more freely. They could use it for economic development, whereas it used to not be that way. But I think you're going to see that going on, and especially around those anchor institutions. So you might have had a sort of, traditional neighborhood that was getting a little worn down, and then the city comes in and declares it in blight, and they come in with their developers and they revitalize the area. That is another way that people are being transitioned to a rental situation from ownership, maybe through declarations of blight. But Just one last thing, and I hope I've answered a little bit of your question, is that, we're moving toward an economy that is based on having subscriptions to things. So you will own nothing and you'll be happy. You'll you'll just subscribe to, a car wash service. You'll subscribe to uh, the media stations that you like. You'll subscribe to, uh, gym memberships, to co-ops, to rent tools, all sorts of things like that, because you won't have the money in the disposable income, especially after these job losses, to buy your things right then. So we're sort of getting used to this subscription-based economy, even now. I think. I hope, does that answer? I mean, that is the really tough question. I tend to think that if you have, I mean, I think there are a couple of different ways you can approach it. One is if you see those developments happening in one area, say, your driver's license is being held ransom, I would try to find another area that they haven't addressed yet, or that they're not focusing on yet, and try to protect that area and raise awareness of it, um, so that you could gain some momentum in terms of developing a skepticism about the process of licensing in general, and governments holding those licenses hostage. I mean, you know i I sort of think that we might have to re-educate ourselves in the common law tradition. And this is, I have to sort of be careful saying that, because there is one argument that says you have to scrap the whole system that we're under right now. So for the US, they want to scrap the US Constitution because they say it was changed by the Banking Act of 1871. We're living in a corporation, so it's never going to protect you. You have to throw it all out and start over, and do a sort of common law re engineering of government. I personally am skeptical of that, because for a number of reasons. One, I don't think it's possible. Uh, Two, I think that it plays into their narrative of separating out different states and regions. And I do think that the US, and I would think definitely Australia, because you don't have a large population. I would think you guys all need each other. So you don't want to be balkanized. And some of the strains of common law tend to want, I think that they could end up balkanizing larger countries like Canada, the US, and Australia. But I think we should probably start to educate ourselves about how that common law still works and can be used to fight things like licensing. And, the more people are doing it and talking about it, the better we will be. Because judges especially are going to have, they are subject to intense scrutiny by the public. And if you can raise public awareness and get people looking at one particular person who has to make a decision in a case, you can exert substantial pressure on that person if you have a large vocal majority that is bringing this particular case to the fore. And because this is about reputation management, even say, let's just imagine that your judge he got his position as a favor, and maybe someone holds some knowledge over him, and he's usually blackmailed into making decisions that go against the Constitution and the people's rights. Let's just imagine that. Well, if you have a large vocal public support for one person who is using common law arguments to defend his or her right to travel freely without a license, even, or just taking on the you know, the attachment of a penalty, touching your license to something else, even if that judge is really an instrument of the cabal, they still have to keep up public appearances. So if you look, why do they use these anchor institutions? It's because none of this program works if the public really knows what's going on. You have to have an institution that people trust in order to make it work. So that tells me that, and they do this in lots and lots of different situations. It's not just using an anchor institution, but public perception matters very intensely. And so you have to network with people, I think, physically in your locality. And we really have to educate people a lot so that, you know, it might take still a while for people to feel the pain like in their personal life. But at least if we have brought up that conversation and said, look, here's how we're going to be held hostage if we don't actively express support for this communitarian ideology. When it hits home, they will know who to look to. And hopefully, if you know a lot of people who are already awake, you can start to develop a group that's going to try to change the public mindset. And I think, you know, we're going to have to I think we've got to get corporate middle managers in America, you know, and that is the group that I have found that it's very difficult to reach. They've all got their heads in the sand, even though they will be manipulated by these corporations in really, I think, soul crushing ways. But, you know, I don't know, it would be interesting to know from you all if you might have more luck reaching that class. But if you could somehow make that class aware, and they're the ones who are inundated with the buzzwords. So if you started saying, this is what these things mean, maybe you could change just the overall public opinion to fight that. But really, more likely, it's going to come down to real tyranny. And then finally, people take their license plates off their vehicles. They ditch their, we have their cards or whatever. And you start breaking or peacefully dismantling the cameras that do all of this stuff, you know? Probably, I think that's what it's going to take.
I think, sorry, just to make a comment, I think that people, because we've just been fed a certain narrative, you know, around net zero, and you're only allowed to discuss things in those terms, and there is more and more of a sense that we have to be controlled very much from the outside to make us do the right thing, because when we don't do the right thing, left to our own devices. So I think that narrative is so strong, and I found that when I ran for election, that people said that to me. Well, who's going to make sure that everyone does the right thing if you decrease, this sort of control? But people don't understand that it's corporate control, and it's corporates that cause the issues in the first place, that have now done a PR spin and made themselves these benevolent-looking institutions that are going to make us do the right thing, and they're going to reprofit from making markets and increasingly control us. That's pretty much in a nutshell. is how to get that message out, because I don't think anyone's comfortable with that. If people understand it as that, most people won't be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. If you just look at how this profit model works, you create a trauma, you offer a fix, and everyone feels good about the fix. I mean, I have a graphic that I sometimes use that says, what is, a study has shown that one of the most powerful motivators for human beings is the desire to feel like we are contributing to positive social change. And I mean, I'm an optimist. I'm a Christian, and I think that is, we are sort of designed to want to engage our neighbors, our fellows, in a way that helps all of us. Okay. And so that's why you know I think this is such a dark agenda. It takes this beautiful thing about human beings and it totally twists it. And so how do you break that cycle also, because all of the people who work for these corporations have been told, oh, you're doing something really great, even though it's just contributing to this cycle of revolving door profits. And, in that case, I think you're going to have to find some way of substituting in authentic, real personal life for the satisfaction and the sense of purpose. That's one of their buzzwords, that it right now is being controlled by those corporations. So the corporations sell this to you by saying, we are a mission driven, purpose oriented firm. And so you can come here and work your tail off and you're doing good, even though, so we have to sort of bust that up for that group and say, no, here's a substitute that is actually, it's the original. You take care of your neighbor, and we're all going to be given that opportunity. I think in the next coming months, we're going to have to take care of our neighbors and find that sense of purpose. And then who knows, maybe the whole thing will crumble. You can hope, but I don't want to rely on it. Yeah, well, I mean, they want, really, poverty is a profit center. So, we've seen this controlled demolition of supply chains to cause prices on everything to spike, right? And there are other factors that play into the high inflation that's going on. But, I think they have used the war in the Ukraine, which I think is manufactured, again, to reconfigure supply chains and then also political orders. You know, they want to impoverish you because then you will need those public services that are going to become the opportunities for impact investors to make profits off of changing you or fixing you or helping you. So the goal is create poverty and then manage poverty, right? That's one thing. Also, it ties into the larger narrative about climate change and trying to reduce our carbon footprint and save the planet. So these prices are going to go through the roof just to get us to diminish our usage, which puts a stress and a strain on people. The government's telling them you can't cook or wash clothes before 8 p.m. Well, to me, I think it's actually a psychological operation that's designed to make people feel tense and afraid and to sort of paralyze them so that they won't go out and overthrow the government. Um, And, they combine it with this narrative of, well, we've got to reduce consumption, reduce consumption. So you're going to see that, I think, on all sectors of in the economy. You've got to reduce your meat consumption, and it's going through the roof. Why? Well, we've seen culling of herds. We've seen, you know, ridiculous arguments about cows and methane and things like that. Why? Because they want you to switch to alternative proteins. They always want to have some sort of narrative that's going to make what they're doing look like it had to be done. I think, anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you have to have a smorgasbord of resistance approaches. So I made a little video one time. I said, I think you need a sort of three-pronged approach. One is going to be through the courts, and you're going to have to look for corruption and and get very brave people to raise these issues publicly in the courts, and confront also the public officials who are involved with their infractions and violations of the law. So you're going to have to take this criminal justice legal course of action. But what we've seen here, and I think it's happened where you are too, is that courts are refusing to hear cases, and they're doing virtual models. But still, I would say, don't give up. You still have to keep doing it and keep doing it. So that's one route. The second route, I think, is to have a sort of conservative, um, mainstream businessman's approach. Like, this is addressed to your middle classes, and maybe, the people who are in middle management in corporations, and you have to show them why this makes no sense from a business perspective. Okay. Now, I think you don't have to tell them. I mean, I do, but you use your discretion with people, right? You don't have to make a big to do about the fact that this is designed to be economically infeasible, right? It is not actually designed to work to help people and companies and things in a reasonable, rational way. It's designed to cause chaos so that they can re-engineer a system, right? But not everyone knows that. So you have to come up with, you have to find allies in the traditional sectors of society who are just not going to be convinced by the approaches that are being used. And you say, this is wrong-headed, wrong-headed. And I have lots of faith in the people to agree and then put pressure on these companies. So that's the second prong, is a sort of middle of the road businessman's approach. And then the third is a real grassroots public awareness kind of, I sort of think of it like a punk rock campaign, where you are on the streets, you're passing out literature, and that's all peaceful, right? You don't have to do anything that is in any way harmful to anyone else. You're just educating, but it has to be a matter of really doing it with the aim and purpose of of informing public opinion and shifting the narrative away from these controlled mainstream media productions toward, I'm going to listen to my neighbor. Like, I actually trust the person who I've lived next to, or go to church with or work with or whatever, more than these paid corporations that are using the same words over and over again. So, and then, yes, of course, don't ever comply if you can help it. There are sometimes when you have to make your best judgment, and you might put on a mask just to get your groceries or something. I know it was harder there than it was here to not comply with things. But I think a major way that we can sort of fight this is actually by deciding in a very deliberate way that we're going to live a human life. Like we are going to do things in regular human ways. We're going to talk to people as if they are deserving of our respect and as if they have sense. And, people are drawn to that naturally. We all hunger for that. So if we can reintroduce this personableness and neighborliness into society, I think that is a very peaceful way of changing things. And my friends in Canada that fled down here, her name is Laura, and she said, we went for 2 years without speaking to people at the grocery store. And she said, so when she came over here and everyone's like, ah, da, 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 it was really shocking. And she didn't know actually how to respond. She was caught off guard. So, here we're not to that point yet, but where she was in Canada, they were. And I think, especially in places like that, just reaffirming and deciding you're going to live deliberately in a very human way is powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful sentiment, that we stay human and we keep working with, what does it actually mean to be human? Because that is
Yeah.
the onslaught against that connection and relationships and humanity.
Yeah.
But one last
That's what
question.
they want to destroy, right?
Yeah.
You look at what they want and then you do the opposite. And if you learn the pattern, what are they trying to do? They're trying to nudge you toward a specific outcome. If you can see that they're doing it, you can always course correct. And these are not smart people. They are systems thinkers. They think like computer programs, input, output. So that's why they have to manage the human risk, because we can be chaotic. We can love someone that has hurt us. We can do all of these different things that are like seem irrational. Like, Julianne, what's a talk with the Australians going to ever amount to? Oh, well, who cares? We're going to do it anyway. And we're just going to do it, you know? And that's what these systems thinkers cannot control. And so wonderful things come from it, I think.
Yeah, wonderful connections. We'll just do one last question and then I'll round off.
So, okay, well, I caught parts of it. So it's about the promotion of the indigenous rights and
Partnerships, like
the partnerships
the partnerships with the land
and
councils,
how are they
the
using
land
them
councils
basically.
and how is it being used.
Yeah. Well, okay, so in Oklahoma, we have native lands. I mean, uh, we actually just had a huge Supreme Court case where um, the verdict was that I think it's a third of the state of Oklahoma is now, it's been declared tribal land. And that is, it's a it's a huge, shocking mess, but it's actually happening all over. And there was a big deal with Pope Francis going to Canada, and making an apology about things. So, this is a huge part of the New World Order agenda, is the promotion of Native rights after, there's a long history of abusing Native and Indigenous peoples, right? So how do we explain this? Well, what I see going on here, and I really have not looked into Australia's case specifically, so I'll just talk about what's happening here. And that is that the tribal leaders, like any other, powerful position, have made deals with the people who have the money and the power in other um, governments or financial sectors or whatever. The native people here, the members of the tribes, are absolutely in the dark about what they have been signed up for as a tribe. Okay. And so from my 50,000-foot view, it looks to me like using the argument about tribal sovereignty is very convenient for undermining nation states and their constitutions, and doing it in a way that just gets people who have kind hearts or a heart for justice to give up their rights in order to make this reconciliation with peoples who have been harmed for, decades ago. Okay. So how does that work concretely? Well, here, when they made that big decision about the land transfer, what did it do? It made a decade a decade's worth of court cases have to be retried, and because they were tried in state court, now they have to be tried in federal court or tribal court. So they're prisoners who are supposed to be released because they'd served their state term, who are now facing an entirely new court case. So to me, that looks like a way to just keep people in prison, right? And it's a way to undermine the courts, especially the state courts here. I'm not sure how your judiciary is organized, but the state courts offered some protection to residents of the states against our federal courts, right? So having two levels is a protection, and this is one way to disrupt the state so that we are just under the Fed or the tribal lands. Also, and this is a big one that I haven't seen anybody else talk about, but we're seeing the creation of digital economic zones. And you can do those under tribal authority because they have different commercial codes than the US commercial code. And I would just imagine that the Australian commercial code is similar to ours in many respects. And probably if your indigenous tribes have their own commercial code, it is not as detailed. It allows for a lot of interpretation that the very well-paid attorneys of the corporations are going to use to their advantage. So the corporations here are going to incorporate under tribal authority in digital economic zones as a way to avoid paying taxes to the state or federal government. And then you see there's that cycle of defunding the government, which criminal organization it might be, but still it has to answer to the people in, the popular opinion. We're taking money away from it, and then the private foundations are going to come in and supply the gaps. So the way I look at it, like, I think the members of the tribes are being used and abused just like the rest of us. And, we have the black-white narrative in the US. If Black people and white people could just not read the newspaper, we all have a lot in common. And if we could get our stuff together, then we would be a force. But there's so much money pumped into separating out different people groups and promoting identity politics. And that's going to be really, I think, to the detriment of us all.
Yeah, thank you. It's complex. It needs needs a real unpacking, because you otherwise get called racist, or there's all the way it's been set up where you can't actually you have to be very careful with the way you unpack the narrative they've created, which was intentional. Thank you so much. I've really taken away a lot, and including that we need to start identifying the main players in Newcastle, and that we identify, we just unpack the narrative they've created and actually give real examples of what that means and stuff. That we need to start talking to our actual genuine communities of people that we know. And I think we need to do it now, because, as you said prior, they're going to create the conditions more and more that people start to ask for it, because life gets harder and harder, and then they have to come with these solutions. So right now,
people won't like the idea of it. So right now is the time to start really raising the awareness. And Julianne, I see, so Julianne Romanello, you're on Facebook, and you put a lot out about smart cities, so people can follow you on there. And you're also looking, increasing, like we're looking around the world and looking at the language used in lots of different cities, which is really important for all of us to understand this global governance, and it's got nothing to do with our individual communities and towns and cities. So yeah, people can find you there, and you have a website, don't you? You have a website?
Yeah, it's hearts, like the shape hearts, over hexagons.com. And I really use Facebook the most because that is where the people are. You don't have to have a login to view my account, but then I do try to update the website, you know, when I'm not typing something to someone else.
Thank you so much for your valuable time. We so appreciate it, and appreciate your the contact with you. Thank you so much. And keep up your wonderful work. Thank you. It's so important.
Thanks, Kate. I think you're doing great work. I have met so many Aussies that can unpack this stuff very well, who were looking at it long before I was. So, you know, if there's anything good to come out of this entire mess, it is that, you know, we are finding, you know, these different people from all over. And I don't know, I do like that. I enjoy it, and it is inspiring. And so thank you guys. It's my pleasure, really.
Thank you.